The thunderclap startled Bethany Lawson from her silent vigil by the riverbank. Her skirts gathered around her as raindrops began to pepper the parched earth of Colorado Territory in the summer of 1871. She hadn't meant to stay so long, watching the muddy waters of the Arkansas River flow steadily past her husband's grave, which she had adorned with wildflowers picked at dawn. 6 months a widow, and the pain still cut as deeply as the day Daniel had been taken by the fever. A lone tear mingled with the raindrops on her cheek as she stood, brushing the dirt from her black mourning dress. At 24, she felt ancient, worn down by grief and the burden of maintaining the small homestead on her own. The nearest town of Cottonwood Springs was 5 miles away, and neighbors were scarce in this wild country. "Best be getting back," she murmured to herself, casting one last glance at the simple wooden cross marking Daniel's resting place. The rain was falling more heavily now, and thunder rumbled across the vast sky. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and began the trek back to her cabin, the path already turning to mud beneath her boots. The storm gathered intensity with alarming speed. Wind whipped at Bethany's hair, tearing pins loose until auburn strands lashed across her face. The river beside her churned angrily, rising with each passing moment. When lightning split the sky directly overhead, she quickened her pace, heart pounding in her chest. She was so focused on the treacherous path that she almost missed the movement on the opposite bank. A horse and rider were struggling against the current at a crossing point. Even from this distance, she could see the man fighting to keep his horse calm as the water rose around them. "Turn back." She shouted over the roar of the storm, waving her arms frantically. "The crossing's not safe." Either he didn't hear or chose to ignore her warning. The rider urged his mount forward into deeper water. For a moment it seemed they might make it, then disaster struck. The horse lost its footing on the slippery riverbed and tumbled sideways into the current, throwing its rider. Without thinking, Bethany ran downstream, keeping her eyes fixed on the man being swept along by the raging water. The horse managed to regain its footing and scrambled back to the far bank, but the rider was carried rapidly toward her side of the river. As he neared, she waded in up to her knees, bracing herself against the force of the water. The current pushed him toward her, and she stretched out her hand. Their fingers touched, slipped past each other, then connected again. With all her strength, she pulled, dragging him toward the shallows. Together they stumbled onto the muddy bank, both gasping for breath. The man collapsed onto his back, coughing up river water. He was tall and lean, dressed in the practical garb of a cowboy: denim trousers, flannel shirt, leather vest, and boots. His hat was gone, revealing dark hair plastered to his head. "You saved my life," he managed between coughs. "You shouldn't have tried crossing," she scolded, still breathing hard. "River rises fast during storms." He turned his face toward her, and Bethany found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen, bright even against the darkening sky. "Yates Xavier," he said, offering a hand still wet with river water. "And I'm obliged to you, madam." "Bethany Lawson," she replied, accepting his handshake briefly. "Can you walk? My cabin's not far. You need to get dry before you catch your death." As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Death was not something she spoke of lightly these days, but Yates Xavier merely nodded, struggling to his feet. "My horse will have more sense than you and find shelter," she cut him off. "We can look for him once the storm passes." Lightning flashed again, followed almost instantly by deafening thunder. The rain fell in sheets now, and Bethany gestured urgently toward a narrow path leading away from the river. They made their way slowly up the bank, Yates limping slightly. Bethany noticed but said nothing, keeping a steady pace until her small cabin came into view. Built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, it stood as a testament to Daniel's craftsmanship. A pang of loss struck her as she pushed open the door, but the practicality of the situation forced such feelings aside. "There's a blanket by the fireplace," she instructed, moving to stoke the banked coals. Get those wet clothes off before you freeze. She busied herself with the fire, giving him privacy. When she turned back, Yates had wrapped the blanket around his waist, his upper body bare. Water dripped from his hair onto broad shoulders, and she quickly averted her eyes, suddenly acutely aware that she was alone with a handsome stranger for the first time since Daniel's death. "I'll find you some dry clothes," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. She disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a bundle. "These were my husband's, they should fit well enough." "Your husband?" Yates asked, accepting the clothes with a nod of thanks. "He passed 6 months ago, fever took him." The words came easier now after countless tellings, though the ache never diminished. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lawson." "Thank you, I'll make some coffee while you change." Bethany moved to the small kitchen area, grateful for something to do with her hands. She kept her back turned as she heard the rustle of fabric, focusing intently on measuring coffee grounds into the pot. "Decent now," Yates called after a moment. She turned to find him dressed in Daniel's old clothes, a simple shirt and trousers that fit him well enough, though Daniel had been broader through the shoulders. Yates had hung his wet clothes near the fire to dry. "The coffee will be ready soon. Sit by the fire and warm yourself." She gestured to the single chair, but he shook his head. "I won't take your chair, madam. Please, I insist," she smiled faintly. "And call me Bethany. Madam makes me feel like my mother-in-law." That earned a smile from him, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "Bethany, then, and I'm Yates." He settled into the chair, extending his hands toward the fire. In the warm glow, she could see him more clearly, a man perhaps in his late 20s, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. A small scar crossed his right eyebrow, and his hands were calloused and strong. "What brings you to these parts?" she asked, pouring the coffee into 2 tin cups. "I'm headed to Silvercliff. Heard there's work at the Davidson Ranch." Bethany nodded, passing him a cup. "That's true enough. Old man Davidson lost 2 hands last month to the silver rush. He's been looking to replace them." "You know the area well, born and raised in Cottonwood Springs." "Daniel and I settled here 3 years ago." She sipped her coffee, trying not to dwell on memories. "What about you? Where are you from?" "Everywhere and nowhere," he replied with a half smile. "Been drifting since the war ended." "Texas originally, but that was a lifetime ago." The mention of the war cast a momentary shadow between them. 6 years since it ended, but the wounds remained fresh for so many. Bethany wondered which side he had fought for, but decided it didn't matter now. "Well, you're welcome to stay until the storm passes," she offered, "and we can look for your horse in the morning." Yates nodded gratefully. "I appreciate that. I promise I won't be a bother." Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. But inside the cabin, a comfortable silence settled between them as they sipped their coffee and listened to the crackling fire. Bethany found herself studying Yates when he wasn't looking. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quietness that seemed at odds with his profession. Cowboys were typically a rowdy bunch, at least the ones she encountered in town. Yates Xavier seemed different, more thoughtful. "I should check if I have something that might fit you better," she said eventually, setting her empty cup aside. "Daniel was taller than you, but his shirts might work." Yates nodded. "Thank you, but these will do fine. I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble." She hesitated, then added, "It's nice to have company. Gets lonely out here sometimes." The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. She hadn't meant to reveal so much to a stranger, but something about Yates made her feel at ease. "I understand loneliness," he said quietly. "Trail life isn't exactly sociable most days." Their eyes met across the room, and Bethany felt an unexpected connection, 2 solitary souls finding momentary respite in each other's company. The feeling unnerved her, and she quickly looked away. "I should start on supper," she said, rising from her seat on the floor. "Are you hungry? Starving?" he admitted with a smile that made her cheeks warm. "But please, let me help. It's the least I can do after you fished me out of that river." Together they prepared a simple meal of venison stew with biscuits, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease. Yates proved himself handy with a knife, dicing potatoes and carrots with practiced efficiency. "Where did a cowboy learn to cook?" she asked, watching him work. "When you live on your own, you either learn or starve," he replied with a shrug. "And my mother insisted all her boys know how to fend for themselves, said she wouldn't raise helpless men. Smart woman." "She was," he said, a hint of sadness in his voice suggesting she was no longer living. As they worked side by side, Bethany found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something comforting about sharing these simple tasks with another person after months of solitude. When their hands accidentally brushed as they reached for the same spoon, she felt a flutter in her stomach that both alarmed and excited her. By the time they sat down to eat, night had fallen completely, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain pounded against the roof, occasionally punctuated by the distant rumble of thunder. "Looks like you might be stuck here until morning," Bethany observed, passing him a plate. "I hope that's not an imposition." "Not at all. Like I said, the company is welcome." She hesitated, then added, "Though the sleeping arrangements are limited, I can make up a pallet by the fire for you." "That would be perfect," Yates assured her. "I've slept in far worse places than a warm cabin floor." They ate in companionable silence, the stew warming them from the inside. After the meal, Yates insisted on washing the dishes while Bethany arranged blankets near the fireplace. "Tell me about your journey," she said as they settled back by the fire, she in the chair and he on his newly made bed. "Where have you been since Texas?" Yates stared into the flames, his expression distant. "California first after the war, tried my hand at gold mining but found I preferred working with cattle. Since then, I've been following the seasons Texas to Kansas to Colorado, wherever the work is. No place to call home, not anymore." There was a story there, Bethany sensed, but didn't press. Everyone had their wounds from the past, especially those who wandered. "And you?" he asked. "Have you always lived in this territory?" She nodded. "My father was one of the first settlers in Cottonwood Springs. Met Daniel when his family moved there in '65. We married in '68 and built this place together." "It's a fine cabin," Yates observed, looking around appreciatively. "Solid craftsmanship. Daniel was good with his hands." Her voice softened. "He had plans to expand it, add another room, build a proper barn. We were going to start a family." The words hung between them, heavy with unfulfilled dreams. Bethany hadn't spoken of these things to anyone, and she wasn't sure why she was sharing them with Yates now. "I'm sorry," he said simply, and she could tell he meant it. "Life has its own plans, I suppose." She managed a small smile. "Now I'm just trying to hold on to what we built. It can't be easy managing alone." "It isn't," she admitted, "but I'm stubborn." "The neighbors help when they can, though the nearest is 3 miles away." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "What about family? Do they live nearby?" "My parents are both gone. My sister lives in Denver with her husband and children." Bethany sighed. "She keeps trying to convince me to sell this place and move to the city." "But you won't." It wasn't a question, and Bethany appreciated that he understood. "No, this land is part of me now, and Daniel is buried here. I couldn't leave him alone." Yates gazed at her with those intense blue eyes. "I understand holding on to something that matters." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside this small cabin, Bethany felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. "We should get some rest," she said finally, rising from her chair. "Morning comes early on a homestead." Yates nodded. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Bethany. Not everyone would take in a half-drowned stranger." "Well, I couldn't very well leave you to the mercy of that river, could I?" She replied with a smile. "Good night, Yates. Good night." As Bethany retreated to her bedroom, closing the door softly behind her, she found herself more aware of the man's presence than she should be. There was something about Yates Xavier that stirred feelings she thought had died with Daniel. The realization brought both guilt and a strange, tentative hope. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and wondering what the morning would bring. Dawn arrived with clear skies and birdsong, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Bethany rose early, dressing quietly before slipping into the main room. Yates was already awake, folding the blankets she had provided. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice low and pleasant. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No, I'm always up with the sun," she replied, moving to stoke the fire. "Hungry? I could eat, but I don't want to impose further. I should probably look for my horse and be on my way." Bethany felt a surprising twinge of disappointment at his words. At least have breakfast first. The river might still be running high, no sense facing it on an empty stomach. He smiled, and that flutter returned to her belly. "When you put it that way, I'd be a fool to refuse." They worked together again, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, bacon, and coffee. The easy rhythm they had established the previous evening continued, as if they had been sharing meals for years, rather than just once before. Over breakfast, Bethany found herself telling Yates about her small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden that was just beginning to yield its summer bounty, and her hopes to sell enough beef in the fall to carry her through the winter. "It's a lot for one person to manage," Yates observed, refilling their coffee cups. "I make do," she replied, though the weariness in her voice betrayed the truth. "The cattle are the hardest part. Daniel had a way with them that I never quite mastered." Yates seemed to consider something before speaking. "I was planning to head straight to Silvercliff, but if you could use an extra pair of hands for a few days, I'd be happy to help out before moving on." Bethany stared at him, surprised by the offer. "You do that? You don't even know me." "I know you saved my life," he said simply. "And I know what it's like to face everything alone. Sometimes a little help can make all the difference." She hesitated. Having a man stay at her cabin would certainly raise eyebrows if word got around, but the prospect of assistance with the heavier chores was tempting. And there was something about Yates that inspired trust. "If you're sure, I wouldn't say no to some help with the cattle," she said finally. "And there's a fence line that needs mending on the north side that I haven't gotten to." Yates nodded, his expression serious. "Then it's settled. I'll help you get caught up and then continue on my way. First, we need to find your horse," she reminded him, "and your gear." After breakfast, they set out along the river. The water had receded somewhat but still ran swift and muddy. Bethany led the way downstream, following the path she thought most likely for a stray horse to take. "Animals usually head for shelter in a storm," she explained. "There's a stand of cottonwoods about a quarter mile from where you went in. Might be worth checking there first." Sure enough, they found Yates's horse grazing peacefully among the trees, his saddle and bags still secure. The animal nickered when he saw his master approaching. "There you are, Samson," Yates said, relief evident in his voice as he stroked the horse's neck. "Smarter than your owner, aren't you?" Bethany watched their reunion with a smile. "He looks no worse for wear. He's a good horse. Been with me 3 years now." Yates checked the saddle bags, ensuring everything was intact. "All present and accounted for. Shall we head back to your place? I'm eager to start earning my keep." The next few days fell into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Yates rose before dawn each morning, starting the fire and putting coffee on before Bethany emerged from her bedroom. They would share a quick breakfast before tackling the day's chores together. Yates proved to be as good with cattle as he had claimed, gently but firmly guiding the small herd to better grazing areas and doctoring a calf that had developed an infected cut on its leg. He mended fences with efficiency, chopped enough firewood to last Bethany well into the fall, and even helped repair a leak in the cabin roof that she hadn't gotten around to fixing. For her part, Bethany found herself enjoying the company as much as the help. Conversations flowed easily between them as they worked, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, sharing stories of their lives. Yates spoke of his childhood in Texas, his 3 brothers who had scattered after the war, and his dreams of someday having his own ranch. Bethany told him about growing up in the Colorado Territory, the early years of her marriage to Daniel, and her determination to honor his memory by keeping their homestead thriving. What neither of them acknowledged was the growing attraction between them. Bethany caught Yates watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her blush, and she found herself noticing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, or how his hands moved with such gentle confidence, whether handling animals or tools. On the 4th day, they rode together to check the farthest boundary of her property. The summer day was perfect clear blue skies, a gentle breeze and wildflowers dotting the rolling grassland. They stopped to rest the horses near a small stream, dismounting to let the animals drink. "It's beautiful land," Yates commented, scanning the horizon. "You and Daniel chose well." "He chose it," Bethany replied, sitting on a sun-warmed rock. "Said he knew it was right the moment he saw it. I was more practical worried about water access and soil quality." She smiled at the memory. "But he was right. There's something special about this place." Yates nodded, sitting beside her. "Some places just feel like they could be home." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Bethany found herself studying his profile, wondering what it would be like if Yates stayed not just for a few days, but permanently. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a warm anticipation. "How much longer will you stay?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. Yates turned to look at her, their faces closer than she had realized. "I was thinking I should move on tomorrow or the next day. The major work is done, and—" he hesitated, "and I don't want to overstay my welcome." "You haven't," she said quickly. "I've enjoyed having you here." His eyes searched hers. "Have you?" "Yes," she admitted softly, "more than I expected to." Something shifted in his expression, hope mingled with uncertainty. "Bethany, whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. "Another storm coming," Bethany observed, standing quickly. "We should head back." The moment between them broken, they mounted their horses and rode for the cabin at a brisk pace. The storm moved faster than anticipated, however, and they were still a mile from home when the rain began to fall. By the time they reached the cabin, they were both soaked through. Laughing despite their discomfort, they stabled the horses and ran for the door, bursting inside just as lightning cracked overhead. "Twice now I've gotten you drenched," Yates said, running a hand through his wet hair. "I'm beginning to think I bring the rain with me." "I don't mind," Bethany replied, wringing water from her skirts. "We needed the rain." Their eyes met, and the laughter faded into something more intense. Droplets of water clung to Yates's eyelashes, and without thinking, Bethany reached up to brush them away. Her fingers lingered against his cheek, and he caught her hand in his. "Bethany," he said, his voice husky, "I should tell you, I wasn't completely honest about why I was crossing that river the day we met." She tensed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't just heading to Silvercliff for work. I was running from something." His expression was pained. "There was a fight in a saloon in Pueblo. A man accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't, but he wouldn't let it go, drew on me." "What happened?" she asked, not withdrawing her hand from his. "I had to defend myself." "My bullet found its mark, his didn't." Yates's eyes never left hers. "The sheriff said it was self-defense, but the man had friends. They swore they'd find me." Bethany absorbed this information, searching his face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I care about you too much to keep it from you," he said simply. "And because I've been thinking of staying longer, maybe permanently, but I won't bring trouble to your door." Her heart quickened at his words. "Is there any reason to think these men would track you here?" Yates shook his head. "Not likely. I've been careful, but I wanted you to know the whole truth before." "Before what?" she prompted when he trailed off. Instead of answering, he leaned down and kissed her softly. The touch of his lips against hers sent a current through Bethany's body more powerful than any lightning strike. When he started to pull away, she moved closer, deepening the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I shouldn't have done that, Yates whispered, though his arms remained around her. I'm glad you did, Bethany replied, surprising herself with her boldness. I've been wanting you to. His expression softened. I never expected to find someone like you, Bethany Lawson. I crossed that river running from my past, but I think I was really running toward my future, toward you. She smiled up at him, heart full of emotions she had thought lost forever. Then maybe you should stay a while longer, see where this leads. Are you sure? I don't want to rush you. I know you're still grieving. Bethany considered his words carefully. I will always love Daniel. He was my first love, and part of me will always grieve for what we lost. She placed her hand over Yates's heart. But I've learned that life is too unpredictable and too short to turn away from happiness when it finds you. Yates covered her hand with his own. I can't promise it will always be easy. My past might catch up to me someday. Nothing worth having comes without risk, she replied. And I think you're worth the risk, Yates Xavier. As if to seal her words, she kissed him again, feeling as if a weight she hadn't even recognized was lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since Daniel's death, she was looking toward the future rather than dwelling in the past. Over the following weeks, Yates became a permanent fixture at the Lawson homestead. They took things slowly, getting to know each other's rhythms and habits, strengths and weaknesses. He moved into the small lean-to that adjoined the cabin, respecting Bethany's reputation among her neighbors. When fall arrived, bringing with it the cattle sale in Cottonwood Springs, they rode into town together. Bethany introduced Yates to the community as her ranch hand, but the knowing looks exchanged by the townspeople suggested they suspected there was more between them. They're talking about us, Bethany murmured as they left the general store, supplies for winter loaded in their wagon. Does it bother you? Yates asked, helping her onto the seat. She considered this, then shook her head. No, let them talk. I'm happier than I've been in a long time. His smile was worth any amount of gossip. So am I. As they were preparing to leave town, a man approached their wagon. Bethany recognized him as Sheriff Mills, a fair but stern lawman who had known her since childhood. Mrs. Lawson, he greeted her, tipping his hat. And you must be Mr. Xavier. Heard you've been helping out at the Lawson place. That's right, Yates replied, offering his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Sheriff. Mills shook it, his eyes assessing. Word travels in these parts. Heard there was some trouble in Pueblo a few months back. Bethany felt Yates stiffen beside her, but his voice remained steady. There was. Man accused me of cheating at cards, drew on me when I denied it. Sheriff, there ruled it self-defense. Mills nodded slowly. Got a telegraph from Pueblo about it, just wanted to hear your version. And? Yates asked. And it matches what I heard. The man who drew on you had a reputation for being quick to anger and quicker to draw. The sheriff's expression relaxed slightly. Just wanted to make sure Mrs. Lawson here wasn't harboring trouble. I appreciate your concern for my safety, Sheriff, Bethany said firmly, but Mr. Xavier has been nothing but a blessing to me and my homestead. Mills tipped his hat again. Good to hear. You two have a safe journey home. As they drove away from town, Bethany could feel the tension gradually leaving Yates's body. Well, that's one hurdle cleared, she said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Seems so, he agreed, though I expect there will be others. We'll face them together, she promised. Winter settled over the Colorado Territory with a vengeance that year, bringing heavy snows and biting cold. Bethany and Yates spent the long evenings by the fire, planning improvements to the homestead when spring arrived. They would expand the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. The cattle herd would grow, as would the vegetable garden, and as the snow deepened outside, their relationship deepened as well. On Christmas Eve, with candles glowing and a special dinner laid out on the table, Yates knelt before Bethany with a simple silver ring. I know it hasn't been that long, he said, his voice husky with emotion, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Bethany Lawson. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married on the first day of spring in a simple ceremony by the riverbank where they had first met. Reverend Thomas from Cottonwood Springs officiated, and a small gathering of neighbors and friends witnessed their vows. As the years passed, the Xavier homestead flourished. The cabin grew into a proper house, and the herd expanded to become one of the most respected in the county. They welcomed 2 children, a boy named Daniel, in honor of Bethany's first husband, and a girl they called Hope, for what they had found in each other. On their 10th anniversary, Bethany and Yates stood once more by the riverbank, watching the water flow past just as it had on that stormy day when fate brought them together. You ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't tried to cross that river? Bethany asked, leaning against his shoulder. Yates wrapped his arm around her. Every day, one decision, one moment changed everything. He kissed her temple gently. Best mistake I ever made, she laughed, turning in his embrace to face him. Who says it was a mistake? Maybe it was exactly where you were meant to be. You may be right, he conceded, gazing at the woman who had waited alone by the riverbank until he crossed the water and never left. Some things are just meant to be. As the sun set over the Colorado hills, casting golden light across the land they had built together, Bethany and Yates walked hand in hand back toward their home, their future, and the life they had created from an unexpected meeting by a river that had once divided them, but now served as a constant reminder of how love can bridge even the most turbulent waters.